Hi, and welcome to our webinar. Today, we're talking about Apple Modern Deployment Identity. My name is Katrina Tauro, and I'm a Project and Resource Coordinator for CompNow. My role is to coordinate and assist our clients with resourcing for projects both on a large and small scale. With us from CompNow today is Marcus Ransom, who is our Apple Solutions Architect, and Aaron Poley, our Senior Pre-Sales Engineer. Let's start today with asking the most basic question. What is Apple Modern Deployment Identity? Marcus, can you take us through this?
Yeah, certainly. So modern deployment identity is really an opportunity for us to help organizations look at how they integrate identity management into their Apple fleet. So identity management is really important for organizations to be able to manage who can access what different services, who can access their devices, and what those devices can do. And there are lots of different ways that we can achieve this. And there's also lots of different ways that we can achieve this in a modern way. So this is really an engagement where we work with you to understand what your objectives are for identity management in your Apple fleet, and then look at all the different solutions that there are, both built into the operating system, but also third-party tools that can be used to streamline in a secure, modern, efficient way.
So essentially, Marcus, it's assessing the customer's environment and then having a look at what we can offer them in terms of what's in the operating system, and as well as third-party apps and things.
Yeah, definitely. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of solution. It really is having a look at what their environment is like, what sort of problems they need to solve, and then looking at all the various different ways that we can solve that. But definitely with a view of taking them from the more legacy ways of dealing with identity management, things like binding to Active Directory, and looking at how modern cloud identity providers, multi-factor authentication, those sorts of things can be sort of really easily integrated into their environment.
Cool. So what are some of the different ways that we need to incorporate identity management into our Apple deployments, Aaron?
Yeah, look, as Marcus said, binding to Active Directory is something that is a long-standing way of understanding who people are in the context of a device. What's quite interesting is we're finding, in terms of what Marcus said as modern ways, a lot of emphasis now is put on who you are, not just or not only on what you're using as a device. And if we look at binding to Active Directory, for example, that is very much about knowing the identity of the device because it's bound, because it has a relationship, a two-way handshake, if you like, between that device and Active Directory. And because of that trust that's established, we then have users authenticate as who they are. In modern terms, the world has scaled a lot from being in an on-premise environment on the corporate network. We're very much having people use whatever device they have access to get access to your organization's information and the outside world. So in a modern sense, we actually need to think a lot less about the physical locality and the exact device per se that they would always use to access that information. And we need to think more about how can a person's identity inside of your organization scale and be flexible to the many devices that they use in a modern way that doesn't tie them to a location. And COVID-19 is the best example I can give over the last 2 years of how we need to think differently. And this module, this exercise, is designed around, okay, let's look at things like Active Directory. What else can we do to not be so tied to that particular network, that particular device? Modern workforces really are centered a lot around things like Azure AD, for example, as a direct replacement for that, or Okta, or other solutions that are on the market in terms of how we understand a core set of identity, of a username, of a password, of access to different things. Identity and access management is another way to think about that. So we can take this traditional tools and go, great, they serve their time and their purpose. Now let's think about how I can identify as who I am, in a trusted way, because we do have to make sure that there is certain levels of trust and assumptions of risk that have been mitigated, that type of thing. And then use that, whatever that's core, central, often cloud-based identity, and use that in a way that I can identify as who I am in a secure way with all sorts of different factor. And I'm sure we'll talk about that as we go. But then lead into, right, I can pick up this iPad, I can pick up this MacBook, and I can get access to what I need to get access to get my work done.
It's also important to understand that we're not saying don't use Active Directory. Active Directory is a really powerful tool and really well used in many organizations. It's really the process of binding a Mac to Active Directory, which is the idea of there's a point in time where we establish a trust between the Mac and your organization. And then from that moment onward, it's pretty much considered as a trusted device, regardless of what happens to it and regardless of who it may actually be that's using it. So it's really taking a step backwards, and rather than saying, okay, we need to bind to Active Directory, that's our organizational policy, we ask ourselves a question, what are we actually trying to achieve here? What were the things that your organization was getting from binding to Active Directory? And most importantly, what were the things your organization thought they were getting from binding to Active Directory? But when we look at it, we maybe aren't actually achieving those levels of security. And then looking at how do we actually address those needs, rather than, we don't want to just take something away and then go, oh, no, you don't need that anymore. How do we actually fulfill those objectives in a way that is supportable, sustainable, a much better user experience, and is going to continue to work and allow the users to get the most out of their devices, allow users to get on with doing their job, but have that assurance that it's being done in a safe and secure way, and that it is actually the people doing their job that you want to be doing it, not somebody else using the device, with a password they found on the Post-it note underneath the computer.
Yeah. So in summary, Marcus, would you say we're catering more towards the individual and how they're going to use the device rather than just what device they're using? Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Giving it, the idea where you have your work computer, it's a desktop that's chained to a desk somewhere, connected with an Ethernet cable. That's not the way people work anymore. Even when we move to people having laptops, the idea of someone only having one work device, where we see scenarios, especially in lockdown, where somebody wants to come home, they've got their work laptop, but maybe they've actually got this really awesome 27-inch iMac at home with a really great screen. How can we actually look at ways where we're allowing them to use some interactions with work on that device, and here's how we can do it. But if they're actually on their work device, we can identify that they're on that device, and so we can open up more possibilities for what they're able to do and different ways they can access things.
Yeah, I think that's really important given the kind of environment that we're in right now as well. But what kind of organizations would benefit from the identity integration, Aaron?
Yeah, so look, I think the short answer is most, if not all. Again, talking in this post-pandemic world that we're in, a lot of organizations have had to rethink how they do not only device management, but also the user identity. But very, very specifically, I think anyone who hasn't critically looked at this area of their users and their users in the context of Apple devices in the past 2 to 3 years. I think anything outside of that, a lot has changed in the landscape, say from 10 years ago or even 5 years ago on how this is done. So I think it's really good that anyone that has that existing footprint inside of our existing Apple ecosystem, I should say, inside of their environment, it's a really, really good time to kind of stop and look at this, look at it in the context of the advances that Apple have made on their platform, on macOS, for example, on iOS, and also in their services such as Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager. That in combination with the advancements we've seen in third-party tools and integrations as well, it's a really good time to relook at this area and think about how identity is happening. So yeah, short answer, everyone who meets that criteria, no matter what type of organization you are, business, education, etc. If you haven't thought about it to that degree in the last 2 to 3 years, this is the time to reevaluate and help us do that for you.
Thanks, Aaron. So I might throw this next one to Marcus. So what teams do we work with on the customer side to achieve this?
Okay, so successful integration and exploration of products like this can't just be isolated to one team. So obviously we're going to have the device management team, end user computing, the people who are responsible for actually for the Macs in your organization. But it's also important to talk to your security team, your identity management team, all of the people that are involved in understanding how this is going to work in your organization. There may be some application delivery teams. So finding out what it is that they would like to be able to do with identity in your organization, and then to be able to demonstrate some of the solutions that we have, some of the ways we can solve these problems that maybe aren't being leveraged well in your existing workflows.
Yeah, I think I would add to that as Marcus said, the breadth is really there in when it comes to identity to really touch a lot of different areas inside of the technology stack of the organization. So it's really, really important to think about and involve everyone that touches your identity, which probably is going to be everyone. Because the reality is that we see great examples of organizations being able to take a simple sign-in screen, such as, for example, the Azure AD screen, identifies who they are, do some sort of second factor to a phone, push notification, for example. And then that experience is something that's replicated time and again across all sorts of different areas of the technology stack, from both corporate devices to personal devices. So if we're able to really think holistically around how identity is used in the organization, and then make it so that it's not foreign or different in the Apple stack, right? But make it a consistent experience and a consistent expectation, if you like, around how your end users, how your people will identify who they are across the different platforms. I think that's really, really important to a successful experience.
It's also really important to go into that kind of depth to understand where we can then integrate this, because there's often a misconception when we're throwing around terms like single sign-on that it's just a matter of there being one tick box or one configuration, and then that cloud identity is then applied to everything on your device. But when we actually start looking at it, there's lots of different places that this can be integrated that all need to be addressed slightly differently in order to be able to leverage that. So we're looking at things like enrollment customization. So when you're setting up a device, leveraging that cloud identity, not just to know who's using the device and apply customization that way, but also to put a bit of a gate in front of it to say, unless you can actually authenticate at this stage, then you're not able to set up this device as a corporate-owned device and get all of the important credentials that come with that. But then it's also, how is the user account set up on the device? How is that managed? How can we streamline access to, for example, Microsoft Office products, printers, all sorts of other applications that will be using that identity. And that's really where things, step outside of the traditional binding to Active Directory, where that really relied on you log into a machine and then that gives you access to everything that you want. But we know now, people don't log out of their machines. We see some laptops that have got amazing uptime that haven't been logged out of for, months on end. But we still want to make sure that, from a day-to-day, hourly basis, that we're sure that the person who's using this device is who should be using this device. And the different ways you're accessing all of these services, whether it be in the office or whether it be at home, that we can handle that.
So it's a good way to kind of keep track of all the devices you've got in a fleet. Would that be right?
Not just the devices that you've got in your fleet, but also who's using the devices as well, which can be really important. We set up these devices and they go out into the hands of the users, and we may not see them for long periods of time. But being able to keep track of who's using the device, what different systems they're using, and to make it really easy for them to use those systems without having to sort of use cumbersome legacy ways of doing that, is really important for organizations to really understand their fleet, how it's being used, what it's being used for.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So, Aaron, what are some of the new features that we're able to look into?
Yeah, so look, we've talked a bit around the advancement that Apple has made both in macOS, iOS, so the operating system platforms, as well as in their more cloud services like Apple School Manager and Apple Business Manager. Well, one key area that we look at as part of this exercise is that integration between Apple School or Business Manager and their cloud identity. So that could look like Azure AD, for example, and having what are called managed Apple IDs. So their identity or your organizationally owned and managed identity for that person inside of the Apple ecosystem. That's a really, really powerful and important thing that Apple is investing into at the moment that maybe your organization hasn't looked at yet. So we kind of look at how to tie that system, that portal, into your central identity so that we have the ability to, for example, sign into a device in that Apple ID and have that automatically redirect pop-up go to your common central identity management sign-in system such as Azure AD. And in the background, that can tie into not only authentication, which is what that kind of sign-in process is, but also authorization and understanding of the groups, or the case of an education environment, the classrooms, different things that individual is supposed to be part of. So it's really important that we get to look at that, not only on the macOS device side of things, where Apple has made some advancements, but also in the school and business manager context, where there's some cool innovation that Apple is bringing to that space and kind of a unification, if you like, of experience across other similar platforms.
But it's not just limited to that manage Apple ID. It's also looking at, and there's often a lot of confusion where people think that federating their managed Apple IDs then translates through into all of the other areas of using the devices. But it's being able to demonstrate that you're using the same identity provider for authentication for all of these services, but they're then allowed to be themselves and operate the way the vendor for that service needs that to work or has designed that to work. The same with the various different parts of the operating system. We can federate the managed Apple ID, but the login window of the device can still be the login window of the device. We can use single sign-on extensions. We can use Kerberos extensions to be able to access credentials and permission to use different services when you're in the office or when you're out of the office for certain amounts of time. We can also even look at things like using certificates for identities, where it's not going to be a specific user-based identity, but it is going to be a device-based identity, looking at the way PKI and certificates can operate in a more modern and especially cloud-based environment.
Yeah, awesome. So I was just going to throw out a question kind of from the point of view of those who are watching. What else does having a secure environment mean to their organizations? Aaron, if you want to take this one.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's really from a security perspective, a securing perspective, what we have to understand, it's a bit of what Marcus and I have talked about a bit earlier around identifying who people are, yes, the devices they're using, but also what they're accessing. So, your IP, right, is another way to think about that, your intellectual property. So it's really important for us to have secure and confident ways, as Marcus mentioned before, of identifying who someone is, not only at a single point in time, but in an ongoing perspective, right? So that idea that, that device is bound to AD, they've signed in and then they haven't signed out for 365 days. You don't really have a lot of confidence on who is using that device at any given time. So it's important for us to look at the flow of identity, which then directly affects the flow of data, and understanding, what are those checkpoints, what are those security measures, and that all really ties in heavily into how you do identity and how you do identity on both the device, but also on a services level as well.
It's also being able to give that certainty as well, that if a user has left the organization for various reasons, whilst the devices may still be there, that then you can then have that assurance that they're now not able to get back into that device, that identity has now flowed through to devices that maybe aren't in the office, maybe haven't gone back. The asset tracking system maybe hasn't realized that it's actually been given to a different user, that identity is now no longer able to access devices wherever they may be, however they may be have been configured to use them.
And very much a case of, hey, let's identify where there are technical solutions to help, fill those gaps, but also very much as well identify where there are gaps in what is acceptable and not acceptable risk. I think it's as much important to know about where the gaps are, where the risk elements are, and articulate and know that and accept those, as much as it is to just kind of plug holes with technical solutions that potentially are clunky as well. So it's very important to have that holistic understanding of the landscape, of how data is used, of your threat landscape, for example, from a security perspective, which often ties into identity, and understand, where do I manage things ongoing? Where are things kind of left up to the end user? Where those other types of gaps are, and be confident and comfortable with those inside of the Apple ecosystem.
Yeah. So, Marcus, do you want to take us through what the process for the engagement is?
Okay, so it's really important to understand that this is about having an exploration of what's possible in your environment from a technical point of view. So it's something where it's a couple of days engagement, depending on your requirement. That can be both offsite or onsite, depending on how things are set up, what you need. But that's us going through with some test devices and showing the possibilities of what these configurations could be able to be set up in your environment, how things could work in your environment. That then gives you the opportunity to try that out and experiment with it, see how things work, and then make decisions about what you want to move into production. So it's very much a technical hands-on engagement. So working closely with the people that are managing your devices, the people that are responsible for identity, and then actually building out working examples of these, identifying which ones are, most importantly, as Aaron said, which ones are not appropriate for your organization. Either that's not a problem we're needing to solve, or that's something that's not really going to be useful for us, and then focusing on what are the places where we can actually make some really important changes to the organization and see some success there, and then work through with your team how this works, how this deploys, what Apple's vision is, how Apple have integrated this into the devices, into the operating system, so that you can successfully use it.
Yeah, so essentially we're giving them an example of what an Apple environment could do for them.
Specifically when it comes down to how you're integrating identity, yes.
Yeah. Awesome.
So it's also important to understand that this is something that you don't need to be designing out how your entire Apple ecosystem is working. You don't need to be an organization who is not using Apple devices and this is dipping the toes in the water. You can be an organization that is at any stage of your journey from using Apple devices. You may be an organization that has been integrating thousands of Macs into your network, but this is just taking a step back and looking specifically at identity and going, okay, is there a better way of doing this? What's out there? What's the direction Apple's going in? How can we actually combine a couple of these tools to solve some problems and address some of the challenges that you're having?
So Aaron, is this still beneficial for those who are new to Apple or wanting to dip their toes into the pool of Apple? Is that something that's still beneficial?
Look, it's a great question, Kat. I think, as Marcus said, that you can be at any stage of the journey for this engagement. Obviously, when we're talking about just identity, there could be other elements of your ecosystem that need review or need proof on how they can work. So as CompNow, we have other offerings, for example, separate to the identity offering in theme of the modern deployment concepts, where we can do other exercises that are wider than just identity. So if you feel that you're at a phase where you're kind of comfortable with the elements of how you deploy, or you haven't really started in the Apple journey at all, the identity piece can help equip that one element of identity, as we've said, which ties into a lot of others. But through that process, it may be identified that there are other areas you actually could work on and address and iterate on as well. So the short answer is this will deal in that space, and that will deal in how identity ties into the wider Apple ecosystem. But there may also be opportunity for us to help you in larger areas of how you deploy Mac or how Apple devices are used in your organization in a wider sense, not just identity.
Thanks, Aaron. So, Marcus, can you take us through what CompNow brings to the Apple modern deployment space?
So, as many of you who've been working with CompNow know, this is our heritage. It's in our DNA working with Apple devices. We've been doing this for a long time. We're Australia's first Apple Authorised Enterprise Reseller, which was really validating the long history we have of supporting and managing Apple devices in the enterprise world. So we've got over 75 engineers who have got a long history of working with all of the main enterprise deployment tools, all of the identity management platforms. So this is what we do. So we can bring that experience that we have and then look at your organization and work out what's appropriate for your organization, because every organization is going to have different priorities, different workflows, different requirements. And that's the way we like to address this. Rather than one size fits all cookie cutter approach, we can tailor a solution to what you actually need. We can put all the building blocks together and come up with something that's going to achieve your objectives and solve the problem in a way that's important for your organization.
Aaron, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, look, I think as Marcus said, it is in our DNA. It's our heritage, it's our ancestry, it's our pedigree. We bleed Apple, definitely in the case of understanding, where we've come from. But that's been paired with experience on the ground. As Marcus said, with over 75 engineers, really taking the theory and the concepts, applying them, and then seeing where it comes out on the other side. So we bring that wealth of experience and knowledge to this exercise to really understand not only where did Apple come from, but more importantly, where is Apple going? And our partnership with Apple, our status as the Apple Authorized Enterprise Reseller, and other partnerships and other connecting points we have with Apple are really important to us to make sure we're staying on top of what is the latest and greatest and what we should be doing with our customers. And then mixed with that real world experience, gives us some skin in the game to understand, what we should be recommending to our customers.
So, Marcus, where can we go from here?
So once we've had a look at how we integrate identity, it may be that we want to make some decisions with our infrastructure. The way that our infrastructure is set up may have been perfectly valid the way it was designed, but we need to start thinking about different ways of doing things. But then it's about what have we learned in this engagement and how do we then move that out into production? So we always want to test things in a safe, non-detrimental manner that isn't going to break production, that people can still do their job. But once we've identified where the benefits are, there's lots of ways we can move that forward. Depending on the skills that you have in-house, it may be that this is a sort of engagement where it's just that knowledge transfer and then your internal teams are able to run with it. But it's also something where we can structure all sorts of different programs to help you work out how to implement this into reality. How do we turn the dream into real world? And that's where it's speak to CompNow, talk to us, tell us what it is you need, and then we'll come up with a way of implementing that.
All right, well, we'll leave it there, guys. If there is anything that you'd like to know more information about, feel free to send us an email at sales@compnow.com.au. And thanks again for tuning in. See you later.